Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Gabor Maté's The Myth of Normal. And this book is...
amazing.
I know. It really does kind of blow your mind.
Uh-huh.
I feel like it makes you question.
Everything.
Yeah, so much of what we think we know about, what it means to be normal. And,
it really does.
Yeah, and we're going to be kind of exploring those connections between our culture and trauma and how that impacts our well-being.
And it's all connected too.
Yeah, for sure. It's all very much intertwined.
Yeah.
So what I really love about this book is that Maté starts out with a story, a very human story. And
relatable.
Super relatable.
Yeah.
So he talks about how, he was at a speaking gig and he got upgraded to business class.
Nice.
Right? So he's feeling pretty good about himself.
Of course.
And then his wife texts him.
Oh.
And she basically tells him that she hasn't even left to pick him up from the airport yet.
Oof.
Yeah. And so you would think that maybe he would be, a little frustrated.
Right. Oh, no.
But he gets hit with this wave of rage.
Intense rage.
And he's withdrawn and irritable for almost a whole day.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's this reaction that actually reveals a deep connection to his own childhood trauma.
During the Holocaust.
Yeah, which is so heavy. Right.
Right,
You wouldn't expect that. But, this is where it gets really fascinating for me, is this whole idea of detachment. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
So this is basically a coping mechanism.
Yes.
That Maté explains. And, it's essentially a way of shutting down emotionally to kind of protect yourself from further hurt.
Makes sense.
It makes sense.
So especially when you're talking about childhood trauma.
Yes.
It's that survival.
Yeah, your brain is literally trying to protect you from feeling that pain again.
Exactly.
And John Bowlby actually observed this in children who were separated from their parents.
Yeah.
During wartime.
Yeah, they would reject their parents when they were reunited with them.
It's like they don't even recognize them.
Right. It's wild.
It's so wild. And then, and then this is where Maté kind of blows your mind, because he's not just talking about big T trauma,
All right.
like war or natural disasters. He's talking about this concept of little T trauma.
The everyday stuff.
The everyday stressors that we often overlook, but they can really chip away at our well-being over time.
Yeah. Things like societal pressures or financial strain or even feeling emotionally unsupported.
It's so true. We don't even realize how much those things can impact us. And then what's even crazier is that Maté argues that trauma's impact goes way beyond just our mental health. It can manifest in physical ailments.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And even influence our susceptibility to chronic illnesses throughout our lives.
Absolutely.
So we're not just talking about anxiety or depression here. We're talking about things like heart disease.
Autoimmune disorders.
Cancer.
Yeah.
And he really drives this point home with this story of Helen.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read that part?
Yeah.
So she's this grandmother who's raising her grandchildren after both of her sons died from drug overdoses.
Tragic.
It's so heartbreaking. And it really makes you stop and think about how trauma can ripple through generations.
Yeah, how much of our behavior or even our health issues could be influenced by things that happened to our parents or our grandparents.
It's true. It's like we're carrying this invisible baggage from the past.
Yeah, that we don't even know is there.
Right. It's crazy. It actually made me think of that book. It didn't start with you.
Oh,
Have you read that one?
Yeah, for sure.
It's all about that inherited family trauma as well.
Absolutely. And I think both books really point to the importance of acknowledging and addressing trauma.
Yeah.
Not just for ourselves, but for future generations as well.
Totally. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about how all of this ties into physical health.
Okay.
So Maté shares this story about cancer nurses
Oh, yeah.
who started to notice this pattern. They could almost sense this link between people-pleasing.
Nice personality.
Yeah, these really nice people.
Yeah.
And cancer diagnoses.
It's so interesting, right? What they were picking up on intuitively is now being backed up by science.
I know, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's like they were ahead of their time.
Yeah. There's actually a study on ALS patients that found something similar. Staff could predict a diagnosis just based on how nice a patient seemed.
Wait a minute. Are we saying that being nice can give you cancer?
No, not exactly.
Okay.
It's not about being kind or compassionate. It's more about what's going on beneath the surface.
Okay.
What these studies suggest is that suppressing your emotions, especially anger,
Okay.
can actually impact your health.
That makes sense. It's like when you bottle up all your anger.
Exactly.
And then it comes out in these like unhealthy ways.
There's actually this fascinating study on men with prostate cancer, and the men who suppressed their anger had lower activity in their natural killer cells. The cells that are responsible for fighting off cancer.
So our emotions can really impact our physical health.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just anger either. Grief has also been shown to increase cancer risk.
Really?
Yeah. There was this study in the Lancet Oncology journal that looked at bereaved parents, and they actually had a higher risk of developing cancer compared to parents who hadn't lost a child.
That is so sad. But it also makes sense. Grief is such a powerful emotion.
And if you don't allow yourself to process it in a healthy way, it can manifest in your physical health.
It's like your body's way of telling you something's wrong.
Exactly. And there's even research that suggests that reducing PTSD symptoms through therapy might actually lower cancer risk.
Really?
Yeah. A Harvard study on ovarian cancer found some promising results. So, all of this is really challenging this idea that our mental and physical health are separate.
I know. It's like we're finally starting to understand that our minds and bodies are
connected.
Completely connected.
And what affects one affects the other.
It's so true. And this isn't like a new perspective. Back in 1939, a doctor named Soma Weiss actually lectured med students about this.
Yeah.
He emphasized that social and psychological factors play a role in all diseases.
That's interesting.
And he argued that mental factors are just as important in treatment as physical interventions.
Wow, ahead of his time.
Totally. So why are we still stuck in this like outdated model of just treating the symptoms instead of addressing the root cause?
That's a great question. It's like we're missing this whole other layer of the healing process.
It's like we're trying to fix a leaky faucet without checking the pipes.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about interpersonal biology.
Okay.
Have you heard of this?
I think so. Is that the idea that we're all like energetically connected?
Kind of. It's more about how our physiology is deeply influenced by the people around us.
Okay.
Especially those closest to us.
Oh, I totally get that. Like, how your mood can totally shift depending on who you're with?
Exactly. And it's not just anecdotal. There's research to support this.
Really?
Yeah. Did you know that studies have shown that married people have lower mortality rates than single people?
Wow. So being in a loving relationship can actually help you live longer.
It seems that way.
That's amazing.
And what's even more interesting is that the effect is stronger for men.
Really? I wonder why that is.
Well, women are often the ones who are expected to manage everyone's emotional stress.
That's true.
So that could take a toll on their health, whereas men might benefit from having a partner who provides that emotional support.
That's a good point. And it's not just our intimate relationships that impact us, right?
Right. Our work environments play a role, too. There was a study of British civil servants that found that people with lower-ranking jobs were actually more likely to die from heart disease.
Wow, so your job really can kill you.
Apparently so. And it's not just about traditional risk factors like smoking or high cholesterol. It's about the stress and the lack of control that often comes with those lower-ranking positions.
It's like the saying, "This job is killing me," might actually be true.
Right. And, all of these findings really point to how interconnected we are, not just with our loved ones, but with our broader social structures and systems.
Yeah, it's like everything's connected.
It really is. And Maté actually brings in this concept of inner being from Thich Nhat Hanh to really illustrate this idea.
Okay, I've heard of that, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
It's this beautiful idea that there are no separate entities. We're all interconnected like threads in a giant tapestry. And our actions and choices have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
That's such a cool image. It really makes you think about the responsibility we have to each other and to the planet.
Absolutely. And it all ties back to what we were talking about earlier with inherited trauma, too. It's not just our genes that we inherit. It's also the experiences and the ways those experiences shaped our ancestors' lives.
So true. And that leads us to another fascinating concept. Epigenetics. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
So basically, it's the study of how our experiences can actually change the way our genes are expressed without altering the DNA sequence itself.
Okay, so it's not about changing the blueprint. It's more about changing how that blueprint is read and interpreted.
Exactly. And this BBC science writer, Martha Henriques, she explained it beautifully.
Oh, yeah.
She said, epigenetics is like a way for us to adapt to changing conditions without causing like a permanent shift in our genes.
Okay, I like that. It's like our genes are the hardware and our experiences are the software that tells the hardware what to do.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So this obviously has huge implications for how we understand health and disease, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It means that even though our genes might, like, predispose us to certain things, they don't necessarily dictate our destiny.
Right. It's so empowering.
Totally.
It means we have more control over our health than we think we do.
Yeah. And this is especially important when we're talking about health disparities.
Oh, interesting.
Like, did you know that there's a study that found higher rates of inflammation in African Americans even when controlling for things like socioeconomic factors?
Really? So, like, it's not just about access to healthcare or lifestyle choices. There's something else at play.
Right. And it turns out that experiences of racism and discrimination were actually linked to these higher inflammation rates.
Wow. So, like, social and environmental factors can literally get under our skin and impact our biology.
Literally. It's crazy. And it makes you wonder, like, how many other health conditions might be influenced by these kinds of social and emotional factors.
Right. Like, we're just scratching the surface here.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Maté actually shares this story about a woman named Me, okay? And she was suffering from, like, debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. And she saw all these specialists, but none of them even considered the possibility that stress or trauma could be playing a role.
That's so frustrating. It's like the medical system is so focused on treating the symptoms that they miss the bigger picture.
It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet without checking the pipes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Have things changed at all?
I think so.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, Maté actually interviewed a doctor who specializes in rheumatic diseases, and she was saying that she feels like a renegade just for considering the role of stress and trauma in her practice. But she said she's seen amazing results with her patients, like even helping some of them get off their meds completely.
That's incredible. So there is hope.
There's definitely hope.
That's good to hear. So if stress and trauma can contribute to things like rheumatoid arthritis, what other conditions might they be linked to?
Well, Maté also talks about multiple sclerosis, or MS.
Okay.
And it's another autoimmune condition that has been linked to childhood adversity and stress. And get this.
Yeah.
The French physician who first described MS back in 1872...
A long time ago.
Yeah. He actually suggested that it was a result of prolonged emotional distress.
Whoa. So this connection has been known for, like, over a century?
Yeah, and since then, there have been tons of studies that have supported that idea. Like, there was this study in Montreal in 1958, and they found that a majority of MS patients had experienced unhappy family backgrounds and, like, prolonged emotional stress before they got sick.
It's kind of shocking that with all this evidence, we're still not really talking about chronic stress as a major factor in these autoimmune diseases.
I know, right? Especially considering that they're on the rise.
It's a serious problem. So, okay, let's talk about this idea of the authentic self. I love how Maté challenges this notion that a lot of the ways of being that our culture considers normal might actually be harmful.
Yeah, like what?
Well, he talks about things like people-pleasing.
Yeah.
You know, self-denial, always putting other people's needs before your own.
Oh, yeah, we're praised for that stuff.
Exactly. But Maté says these can actually be defenses against vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
Instead, like masks that we wear to protect ourselves from emotional pain.
It's like we're all trying to fit into this mold of what we think we should be.
Yeah, instead of just being who we are.
Which is exhausting.
It really is. It reminds me of that quote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure."
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's like we're afraid to let our true selves shine.
Right, because we've been taught that it's not safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this fear of vulnerability can lead us to develop all these compensations that keep us from, like, truly connecting and experiencing fulfillment.
Yeah, we might not even realize we're doing it.
It's true.
Yeah.
It can be so unconscious. So Maté connects this to the concept of attachment.
Attachment styles.
Yeah, so it's basically like that drive for closeness and connection.
Oh, but hey.
That's essential for us as humans.
Yeah.
And he's saying that when our early attachment needs aren't met, you know, we might develop these compensations that mask our true selves.
It's like we're trying to fill a void.
Yeah, but in ways that ultimately don't work.
Right, and we might not even realize that that's what we're doing.
It's so true.
Yeah.
So how do we, like, break free from these patterns and reconnect with our authentic selves?
Well, first we got to understand the bigger picture. Maté argues that human behavior is shaped more by our environment and our experiences than by our genes.
Okay.
He actually quotes Robert Sapolsky, who said, "We are freer from genetics than any other species on Earth."
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
So we're not just products of our biology.
Right. We have the power to choose differently.
I like that. So this challenges this whole idea that humans are inherently selfish and aggressive.
Yes, Maté suggests that that's actually a myth that's perpetuated by a capital system that values individual gain over collective well-being.
It makes sense. If we're always being told to compete and strive for more, no wonder we feel so disconnected.
Totally. Maté points to Darcy Narvaez's work.
Okay.
And she argues that we've become species atypical in our disconnect from our true nature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like we're living in a way that undermines our basic human needs for connection and belonging and purpose.
That's a big statement. And I feel like nowhere is this more evident than the way our culture approaches child development and parenting.
Yeah, for sure. Maté talks about how much emphasis we put on socialization.
Yep.
Which often prioritizes like shaping kids to fit in and meet societal expectations rather than nurturing their authentic selves.
Yeah, it's all about fitting into the mold.
Exactly. And he contrasts this with traditional parenting practices in other cultures.
Like what?
Well, there's this amazing story in the book about a Cree woman who told Maté that in her clan, children weren't even allowed to touch the ground until they were 2 years old because they were constantly being held.
Really?
Yeah. Can you imagine? It's so different from how we do things here.
It's a completely different paradigm.
Right. And it shows how our cultural beliefs about child rearing can have a huge impact on development.
Totally. So Maté also gets into the impact of parental stress and distraction on kids, right?
Yeah. He talks about Alan Shore's research on proximate separation.
Okay, wait, what is proximate separation?
So basically, it's the idea that even when parents are physically present, their emotional unavailability can have negative effects on their kids.
So like the kid is getting this message that they're not worthy of attention unless they're performing in a certain way.
Exactly. And this can lead to problems with attachment and self-esteem and even physical health issues down the line. That's so sad. It makes you think about all the ways we're failing our kids.
Yeah, it's something to think about. And this leads to the whole phenomenon of peer orientation.
Okay. We've heard of that. That's where kids start to focus more on their friends than their parents, right?
Right. And it often happens because their attachment needs aren't being met at home, so they turn to their peers for connection and validation.
Which makes sense. But it also leaves them really vulnerable to things like rejection and bullying.
Absolutely. And you add in the impact of excessive screen time and technology.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right. Maté talks about how technology can actually hijack the brain's reward system.
Okay.
And lead to these addiction-like behaviors.
So it's like they're getting addicted to the dopamine rush of social media and video games.
Exactly. And this can have long-term consequences for their mental health, their relationships, and even their schoolwork.
And it's not just kids who are vulnerable to this, right? I mean, I know plenty of adults who are glued to their phones and constantly seeking validation online. Oh, absolutely. We live in a culture that tells us we're not enough.
Not thin enough, not rich enough, not successful enough.
Right. And this fuels this whole culture of consumerism and addiction.
Yeah, it's like comparison is the thief of joy. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others and coming up short. And then we're told that the solution is to buy more stuff or get more followers.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And Maté actually argues that this is all by design.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like advertising often exploits our insecurities and creates a sense of lack that we're then encouraged to fill through consumption.
So we're being programmed to be dissatisfied.
Basically. And this brings us to Maté's reframing of addiction, which I think is one of the most important parts of the book. He argues that addiction isn't a disease.
Oh, interesting.
It's a natural response to unnatural circumstances.
So it's like a way of coping with unprocessed pain and trauma.
Exactly. He actually challenges the whole disease model of addiction, saying that it limits our understanding and hinders healing.
That makes sense, because if we see it as a disease, then we're more likely to just focus on treating the symptoms rather than addressing the underlying causes.
Exactly. And he shares stories of people who had what seemed like happy childhoods, but who later realized that their struggles with addiction actually stemmed from deeper emotional pain.
It's like those childhood wounds don't just disappear because we don't talk about them.
Right. They fester and grow, and eventually they find a way to express themselves.
Whether it's through addiction, mental illness, or physical health problems.
Exactly. And Maté even quotes this addiction specialist, Dr. Dan Sumrock, who believes that it's all about trauma.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but it highlights the importance of understanding the root causes of addiction. So if addiction is a response to pain and trauma, what about mental illness? Does Maté see that through the same lens?
He does. He really does. He kind of applies that same compassionate approach to mental illness as well. He challenges this whole idea that it's purely a biological phenomenon.
Right, like the dominant view.
Yeah, which he says is like super limited and can even be harmful.
And he brings up that whole chemical imbalance thing.
Oh, yeah. The chemical imbalance.
Like how we're always told that depression or anxiety is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Right. It's just a matter of getting the right chemicals in there.
Exactly. But there's actually very little scientific evidence to support that.
Really? That's so interesting. I feel like I've heard that my whole life. Like it's just become common knowledge.
Yeah. It's like one of those things that everyone just accepts as truth.
Totally. But if it's not true, then what is going on? Like, why are we seeing these rising rates of mental illness?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Maté acknowledges that overdiagnosis is definitely an issue.
Okay.
But he doesn't think that fully explains it. He points to the increasingly stressful environment that kids are facing these days.
Yeah. The pressure from school and social media and just this constant focus on achievement.
Exactly. Like, we're not really giving kids the space to just be kids anymore.
It's so true. And then we wonder why they're also anxious and depressed.
Right. Maté really emphasizes the importance of relational connectedness for mental health.
Okay.
He talks about the work of Bruce Perry,
Okay.
who basically says that our current level of connection, as well as our history of connection, are the biggest predictors of how we function.
Interesting. So, like, our relationships really matter.
They really do. And one of the things that Maté finds concerning is this tendency to look for genetic explanations for mental illness.
Yeah. Like, if it's in our genes, then it's not our fault.
Exactly. And it kind of lets us off the hook for making any real systemic changes.
Right. It's easier to just blame our biology than to actually address the root causes.
Yeah. It's like that saying, the fish doesn't know the water's dirty.
Ooh, I like that.
Like, we're so immersed in this culture that we don't even realize how toxic it is.
It's true. And so Maté's saying that this tendency to look for genetic explanations is actually harmful.
He thinks so, because it prevents us from really understanding the problem and coming up with effective solutions.
Okay, that makes sense. So much of this book is about, like, looking beneath the surface.
Totally. It's about questioning those easy answers and really trying to grasp the complexity of the human experience.
Yeah. And that brings us to the stories we tell ourselves.
Oh, yeah. The narratives.
Yeah. Maté talks about how our minds create these stories to make sense of our emotions, even if they don't always make sense to other people.
Right. It's like we're trying to create order out of chaos.
Even if it means distorting reality.
Exactly. And he shares an example of this woman, Dr. Hunter,
Okay.
who, as a young adult, felt like she was constantly being controlled by external forces.
Wow.
And it wasn't until she explored her own trauma history that she was able to understand where these beliefs came from.
So it's like her mind had created this story to help her cope with something that was too painful to face.
Right. And it's not just these extreme cases. We all create narratives about ourselves and the world around us. It's how we make meaning of things.
Right. But sometimes those narratives can be really limiting.
They can keep us trapped.
Yeah. It makes you think about that story of Leslie and how her self-harming behaviors were actually a way to regulate her nervous system.
Oh, yeah. That's such a powerful example.
It's like she was trying to find a way to feel safe in a world that felt unsafe.
Exactly. And her story reminds us that even behaviors that seem self-destructive can actually be attempts to cope with emotional pain.
It makes me think about Robin Williams and how his comedic genius seemed to come from his own childhood coping mechanisms.
Yeah, he brought so much joy to others, but he clearly struggled with his own inner demons.
It's a reminder that even those who seem to have it all together can be hurting.
Yeah, for sure. And it brings up a question that a lot of people have. What if you don't remember your childhood trauma? Can you still heal?
That's a great question. What does Maté say about that?
He says that healing is absolutely possible even without detailed memories.
Really? So it's not about digging up the past?
Not necessarily. He emphasizes that trauma is really about broken connections. And those connections can be repaired in the present, regardless of whether we have conscious access to the past.
That's good to know, because I think a lot of people get hung up on that. Like they feel like they need to remember everything in order to heal.
Right. But Maté says that's not the case. He even shares his own experience of being told he couldn't participate in a shamanic ceremony because his energy was too dense.
Whoa.
Which the shaman attributed to early trauma that Maté hadn't fully processed.
That's wild. It just shows that healing is a journey, and it's not always linear.
So true. So how do we actually embark on this journey towards wholeness? Maté introduces what he calls the 4 A's of healing.
Okay, I love this kind of stuff. What are the 4 A's?
Awareness, acceptance, agency, and action.
Okay, break that down for me.
So awareness is about recognizing those patterns of thought and behavior that are keeping us stuck.
Okay.
It's about shining a light on those limiting beliefs that we've been carrying around for so long that we mistake them for truth.
Makes sense.
And acceptance. Acceptance is about embracing all parts of ourselves, even the messy, uncomfortable parts. It's about acknowledging our past mistakes and our difficult emotions without judgment.
I love that. Giving ourselves permission to be human.
Exactly. And then agency is about recognizing that we actually have choices. We can move from a place of reactivity to a place of conscious decision-making.
So we're not just victims of circumstance. We have the power to choose differently.
Yes. And then finally, action. Once we're aware, accepting, and empowered, we can start taking steps to actually make changes in our lives.
Okay, so it's about putting all that awareness and acceptance into practice.
Exactly. And that action can take many forms. It might involve setting boundaries in our relationships, learning new coping skills, going to therapy, or even exploring things like psychedelic therapy.
Mate's a big fan of psychedelic therapy, isn't he?
He is, and he's not alone. There's a growing body of evidence that suggests that psychedelics, when used in a safe and therapeutic setting, can be really helpful for healing from trauma addiction and mental illness.
It's like they help us break free from those old patterns and see the world in a new way.
Yeah. But as Maté emphasizes, healing isn't always about these big, dramatic breakthroughs.
Okay.
Sometimes it's about the small, everyday choices we make to nurture ourselves and cultivate self-compassion.
Yeah, self-compassion is so important.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that Maté suggests for cultivating that?
Well, one of the exercises he recommends is asking yourself 3 questions.
Okay.
In my life's important areas, what am I not saying no to? What are the costs of my self-rejecting beliefs? And where did these beliefs originate?
Those are good ones. They really make you think.
And once you've identified those beliefs, he outlines 4 steps to release them.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with those steps.
Recognize, reframe, refocus, and revalue.
I love it. It's like a roadmap for transformation.
Right. And he shares this really touching anecdote about a woman named Nan who struggled with feelings of worthlessness. And she realized that these feelings came from a belief that she was defective, a belief that had originated in childhood as a way to cope with a chaotic environment.
That's so heartbreaking. But I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like, we internalize these messages that we receive as children, and they can stay with us for a lifetime.
And what's so powerful about Nan's story is that she was able to recognize that this belief, while it may have served her in childhood, was no longer serving her as an adult.
Right, it was actually keeping her stuck.
Exactly. So it's not about blaming our parents or anyone else for the wounds we carry. It's about taking responsibility for our own healing and choosing to create a different story for ourselves.
That's such an important message. So this deep dive into the myth of normal has been incredible.
It's such a powerful book.
I know. It's really made me think about my own life in a new way, and I'm definitely going to be recommending it to everyone I know.
I think a lot of people will find it really eye-opening.
Yeah. Maté ends the book with this beautiful quote from Ashley Judd. She talks about finding solace in her connection to nature. She says everything is so individualistic, individual achievement, and even anthropocentric right. Totally self-oriented. When you are part of that larger community Earth, and you are accountable to this mad romance with birds and fish and trees and mountains and sky, you have more to compel you, to guide you.
That's beautiful. It's a reminder that we're not just these isolated individuals striving for our own gain. We're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, when we connect with that something bigger, it gives our lives meaning and purpose.
So true.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the myth of normal. I hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as I did.
Me too.
And remember, the journey towards wholeness is ongoing. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep seeking those connections that nourish your soul.